I'm recording this on Christmas Eve, and it's cold outside, so I'm leaving my hat on. We're going to talk about what's happening with Elijah as that story develops. But note that at this point, he's engulfed in despair. He just wants to die. His activity has seemed fruitless and pointless even after the death of the 450 prophets of Baal. Now his life is in danger. Jezebel wants him dead, but there's an angel who's feeding him miraculously and encouraging him. Let's see what happens in that story as things continue. Meanwhile, let's unpack what's going on in Ezekiel. I found another good site that I like, enduringword.com. There appears to be some pretty good commentary here, and I've highlighted some of it. This tells us that Ezekiel 8 through 11, in other words, 4 chapters, we're reading chapter 8 today, is the record of one long vision. Keep that in mind. It's kind of hard to keep these things in mind since we're only looking at short readings every day. It's easy to get confused. In the beginning of the vision, Ezekiel seeks the glory of the Lord at the temple in Jerusalem. By the end of the vision, Ezekiel chapters 10 and 11, this glory, the glory of the Lord, will depart. And they quote various scholars here. Here's Vaughter and Hoppy. They also supply us with a date corresponding to 17th September 592 BC, or BCE, as they call it. Therefore, something more than a year after Ezekiel had received his prophetic call. Everything we've read so far in Ezekiel has to do with his first vision and the beginning of his prophetic mission from God. What the heck? Look at that piece of hair. That's cat hair. She's on my lap. Now, this tells us this is a second vision, about a year and a half after the first. And we read more about what it is that Ezekiel sees. And apparently they can date it to 17th September 592 BC. He is taken in spirit to Jerusalem. Now remember, he's in Babylon along with the other exiles. Remember that in the 6th century BC, Babylon sacks Jerusalem, destroys the temple. This is during the time of Jeremiah, and some of the Jews are left, but most of them are taken into exile in Babylon, including Daniel. We read Daniel last semester and so forth. So here, Ezekiel is being taken from Babylon, at least in a vision, or maybe physically, by the Spirit of God, to the temple in Jerusalem, but he's being taken into the past because the temple in Jerusalem no longer exists. It's been destroyed by the time Ezekiel has this vision in 592 BC. What he sees is what was going on at the temple during the time of Jeremiah, or during the time of some of the idolatrous kings in Judea prior to the invasion by Babylon and the destruction of the temple. He sees an outrageous idol associated with the king. He sees images and censers associated with the city leaders, and he sees the worship of the sun associated with the priests. Now, they talk about an image of jealousy, at least in the King James translation. What is the image of jealousy? Well, it's an image that would make God jealous. There has been set up in the temple the abomination of desolation. There has been set up in the temple by the various kings of Judea these at least this one statue to a false god. And not only that, remember, he has to bore through a hole. He has to go through the wall, and he sees depicted on the walls of the temple of God built by Solomon depictions of insects and creatures and things that would be unclean for the Jews according to the Mosaic law. It says here in this commentary that those are probably reminiscent of or inspired by the practices of the Egyptians, who worshipped insects and things. Now remember, Israel becomes Israel. They become a people under God as Moses leads them out of slavery in Egypt. So here we have being practiced in the temple worship of not only false gods, but the most degraded and unclean of false gods, insects, Egyptian deities, in spite of the fact that Egypt was the place of slavery that Moses helped the Jews escape from. At any rate, I'm not going to show you all of my highlights because I got carried away. I highlighted a lot. Um, they talk here about how he has to bore through the hole in the wall really to get into the temple. And I think this is an interesting conjecture, apparently by somebody named Block. In spiritual application, this shows that it may take some effort and energy to truly see the interior. If only an easy or surface observation is allowed, the true state of things may not be seen. That's probably not a quote. That's probably from whoever put together this website. In other words, there's a sign that's indicated by Ezekiel's having to do some work. I mean, this is a vision. There's a miracle going on. The Spirit of God could easily just bring him into the chamber where this abomination is occurring, but he's being told he has to dig in the wall. He's got to dig down deep. Now, you guys, my high school students, you don't know what old people know, which is if you really want to see it, there's a bottomless pit of human depravity, including in the church. Translate this in your mind. Suppose you were at St. Peter's or the Lateran or someplace in Rome. Suppose this was a church in Rome frequented by bishops and cardinals in the Vatican, and you've been taken there and you are seeing that they are performing these almost satanic rituals in hidden places within the church. It would be that disturbing and that shocking. Now, we've had behavior that's equivalent to this in the Catholic Church and in our society. Some of it performed by Catholics or other Christians. If you dig, you will see things this bad and worse. Now, your teenagers, I'm not necessarily recommending that, but I'm saying as you get older, don't be surprised if you look through the hole in the wall and you dig a little deeper and you see that we're capable of any amount of evil. That somehow, I mean, just read about what's going on recently in our country, much less what happened during the Holocaust and times like that. And Ezekiel, as a prophet, is being forced to acknowledge this, see it, and encounter it. And it takes some work on his part, but it can't be easy. It can't be fun for him. It's the kind of thing that could make him be filled with despair as Elijah is. Have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel do in the dark, every man in the room of his idols? God showed Ezekiel that the vision was about what the leaders of Israel did in the dark and in the room of his idols. It wasn't about what the leaders did in the temple only, but the hidden place of their heart was filled with dark deeds and idolatry, yet they carried on their service as if all was right. Ezekiel was probably shocked to see that all these city leaders were secret idolaters. They had carried the idolatry of the temple into their private homes. Public and private worship was permeated with the God dishonoring idolatry, and they were smugly complacent in it all. While the external rites of the temple of Jehovah were being observed, these very observances were made a cloak for the thoughts, desires, activities of the heart. This is the most hopeless stage and state of pollution. They think the Lord does not see us. The Lord has forsaken the land. It's one thing to be an idolater and to give yourself over to horrors and evils and disgusting things. It's another thing to be hypocritical, to put up a false front, and to be complacent that nobody will ever pierce your mask, and that you can pretend to be what you're not, hiding all along the darkness within you. So it's Christmas for me. And it's difficult for me to reconcile what I've seen, especially in the last few years, and what I know as an older person, the darkness that we harbor in our hearts with the great spirit of light and love that we're about to welcome and celebrate in the Christmas season. And if that happens to you, if you find yourselves like Elijah, sunk into despair and wanting only to die, talk to someone about it. Don't suffer on your own. Talk to your parents, talk to a priest, talk to a counselor, talk to a friend. Because as dark and difficult as the world can be, one of the messages of Christmas is the light is born in the absolute darkness and stillness. In a bit, we'll hear about how the still small voice of God speaks to Elijah, not in the midst of the roar of the theophany, but in the quiet and the darkness, and in a sense, in the midst of his own despair and despondency and hopelessness. There is a light that is born even amid darkness, but the darkness can seem overwhelming. It must have seemed that way to Ezekiel. It certainly seemed that way to Elijah. So keep hope. We're not done with these visions. We're not done reading what we're reading. We'll see how these things develop. But Ezekiel had to confront the truth. But always remember what Christ says. The truth will make you free, even though it doesn't feel like it.